a meteorologist for half the day for 40 years, and I have never heard of a sting jet.
Well, I keep coming up with new topics for Morse Code of Weather, and one of the reasons why is because I'm not just in tune with our weather locally, but globally, and there's some interesting weather that gets talked about on social media, and I picked up on these sting jets just recently over the past couple of months, so I learned a little bit about them to now educate both you and the viewers all about sting jets here. And they can happen here locally in the northern plains, but they're a lot more common in coastal areas, and we'll give some examples of these sting jets here over the next couple of minutes. But a sting jet usually happens on the backside of a storm system. It's a region of fast-moving, cold, dry air. It's in the upper levels of the atmosphere, but it accelerates as it descends from higher up to then be closer to the ground, and we can see damaging winds with these sting jets in the order of 100 miles per hour or greater. This was an example from the west coast in November. Really beautiful satellite picture of this comma shape, this curlicue with the clouds coming around the area of low pressure. Really strong wrapped up storm system off the west coast. But there was that powerful sting jet just on the southern side of the center of the storm, where the very strong winds descended from higher up in the atmosphere. There was cold air. It's a lot more dense that descends because it's heavier, and as it does so, it accelerates based on the principles of our atmosphere, and that led to some damaging wind gusts along the west coast as this, what we call an atmospheric river or bomb cyclone, very strong storm system, came ashore to the west coast. So these sting jets can develop during the later stages of a storm system. Typically, they're with extratropical cyclones. What I mean by that is you can sometimes get these as a hurricane is transitioning into a cold core extratropical cyclone. So it's a tropical cyclone when it's warm core farther down to the south, but as it comes farther up to the north, that can allow for it to interact with fronts and become cold core, and we call that extratropical. But again, you can see that cloud head wrapping around on the back side of the system, and that's where the sting jet would be present. And that system really wrapped up, and on the southwest side of the storm is where we can get those very strong winds. So the name comes from their appearance on satellite resembling the stinger of a scorpion. It can lead to those very localized areas of damaging wind gusts. So here's that example from November along the west coast. Very powerful atmospheric river with a lot of moisture coming into the west coast, but focused on the center of the area of low pressure. As it really intensifies and clears out, you can see on the southern side where the strongest winds would be. That's the sting jet. Another example again with Hurricane Milton that I noticed, there was a sting jet present with this system as it transitioned from a hurricane impacting the west coast of Florida to then an extratropical cyclone as it interacted with a cold front as it departed the peninsula of Florida. So you could see as it was approaching Florida, the more typical hurricane shape of the storm, but then with some dry air wrapping in, some of those clouds cleared out, but on the western side, there was a sting jet that formed, and more than 90-mile-per-hour wind gusts were observed in parts of Florida. So here's going to the maps here explaining the sting jet with Hurricane Milton with that example here. So you got that cold front that was approaching from the north, and that kind of disrupts the hurricane circulation. It allows it to go from warm core tropical to cold core extratropical and form those fronts associated with it. Going farther north on our globe allows it to interact with these fronts, and for some of those winds on the back side, the colder air to wrap in and descend and accelerate, leading to that sting jet on the western side of the area of low pressure. We can sometimes get those with Colorado lows or big storm systems cutting up through the center of the country here into the northern plains. So they can happen with occluded strong storm systems. And what I mean by that is when the cold front overruns the warm front and we get this purple line on the weather map, that's an occluded front. So the storm system is late in its life cycle, but it can still be very strong, and you can get that sting jet to form on the western side of the low, and we can sometimes see that with a parked or stalled area of low pressure near Winnipeg, and some blizzard conditions on the western side of the Colorado low pressure system, a very strong system that would cut up through our region. So we can look at these systems like they have conveyor belts. There's warm air coming into the south side of the system, but it's that cold air on the back side that we really need to pay attention to with sting jets because it's more dense. It will sink and accelerate as it does so. So on the back side, that sting jet will allow for that very somewhat narrow corridor of strong winds to descend on the southwest side of the low. So they can last a couple hours and are relatively narrow, but focusing on that cold conveyor belt of air coming in on the back side of that system, and we can identify them with this big comma shape on satellite, looks like a scorpion's tail. So again, looking into the Atlantic Ocean, sometimes a hurricane will traverse the entire ocean towards Europe and become an extratropical cyclone. When it's a lot later in its life cycle, it has a cold front attached to it, but it becomes pretty wrapped up on satellite, and we can identify where that sting jet would be to impact Europe's weather. So the UK can sometimes see these sting jets, pretty common, where you can look on satellite and see where those strong winds would be southwest of the area of low pressure, and they can come ashore and cause for some damaging wind gusts for Western Europe. So it's pretty interesting. We can, again, sometimes get them here. There's a rare weather phenomena, but can be very impactful for a relatively small area of the region, but again, they can pack a punch with strong winds.
Yeah, because usually when we see those big sea kind of storms, it's usually on the coast.
Exactly.
All right, thanks a lot. That's interesting. We'll be right back.